The rain fell hard on the broken streets of the colony. The human settlement lights flickered in the distance. Half swallowed by mist, it was late, and most people had already gone inside, shutting doors and windows tight, but one figure remained outside, standing under the dim light of a cracked lamppost. She was an alien widow, her clothes torn, her shoulders shaking from the cold. In her arms, she held the smallest of her 2 children, while the older one clung to her leg. Their eyes were wide and silent, too disciplined for their age, as if they already knew the cost of crying. The widow pressed her lips together, gathering all her courage, and knocked on the door of a human small house. The door opened slowly. A human man stood there, tall, tired from a long day's work. His hands still rough with dust and grease, he frowned when he saw her. Unsure if she was a beggar or worse, before he could speak, she bowed her head low and whispered with trembling words, "My children are well behaved. I can be a good wife to you." "Human," she said, her voice breaking. "We will not trouble you, just give us a roof." "Please." The man froze. Never before had anyone spoken to him like that, not with such desperate honesty. He looked at the children, both silent, both thin and pale. Their faces showed hunger. Their bodies shivered under the thin cloth they wore. For a moment he wanted to close the door, to avoid the weight of their suffering, but something in the widow's eyes stopped him. It was not only fear, there was also strength. A strength of someone who had suffered too much but still refused to break. "Why me?" the man finally asked, his voice steady. "There are shelters, there are others. Why come here?" The widow looked up, her eyes glistening with tears. "They will not take us," she whispered. "They say widows bring bad luck. They say children without a father are worthless." Her voice grew sharper, filled with pain. "They wanted to take me as property, but I refused. I ran, and now I have nowhere else to go." The man stared at her in silence. Her words sank heavy into the quiet night. The children tightened their grip on her dress, hiding their faces as if they were already used to rejection. "I can work," she said quickly, her words rushing out like water from a cracked jar. "I can clean, I can cook, I can do anything you want, just let us stay even for one night." Her voice trembled. But she forced herself to keep her back straight. She was begging, but she begged with dignity. The man glanced at the dark street behind her. Shadows moved in the mist, unfamiliar shapes. Too quiet, too watchful. He felt his heart tighten. It was not only hunger that chased this widow and her children. Something else hunted them, something she was not saying. "Come inside," the human finally muttered, stepping back. The widow gasped softly, almost unbelieving, and guided her children in. The small house smelled of oil, metal, and stale bread. It was not much. But to the widow's children, it was warmth. They stepped carefully, not touching anything, as if afraid they would be punished for breaking the silence. The man closed the door, his eyes narrowing at the shadows outside before locking it. The rain beat harder against the roof, drowning out the world for a moment. Inside, the widow sank to her knees, bowing her head. "Thank you, human," she whispered, her voice soft but filled with relief. But the human only crossed his arms, his gaze firm. "Don't thank me yet," he said. "You have not told me everything." The widow's breath caught in her throat. Her hands trembled as she held her youngest child close. For a second, silence filled the room, broken only by the rain. Then she looked him in the eye, her voice shaking. "If I tell you the truth, you may throw us back into the night," she whispered. "But if I hide it, you will hate me later." Her words left a heavy shadow in the room. The human stared at her, feeling the storm outside was nothing compared to the storm that had just entered his house. The widow pressed her children close, her tears falling silently. "We only need a chance," she whispered again. "My children will never trouble you, and I will be whatever you need me to be." The man's heart pounded. He had no idea what danger he had just invited into his home. But one thing was certain. This night was only the beginning. The widow sat on the floor near the edge of the small room. She didn't dare take a seat on the human's furniture. Her children huddled close to her, sharing a worn blanket the human had silently handed over. The warmth of the house felt unreal, like a dream too fragile to touch. The human man watched from across the room. He stood near the table, arms crossed, face unreadable. He had given her a place to stay, but not trust. Not yet, and the widow knew it. He finally broke the silence. "You said someone was after you," he said, his voice low but firm. "Who?" The widow kept her eyes on her children, brushing her hand through her youngest's hair. Then she looked up slowly. There are those who believe women like me should be owned, she said. They think widows are weak, that we're better used as servants. Or worse, the human narrowed his eyes. And you ran from them? I refused to kneel, she whispered, and when they came for me, I took my children and ran. Where is your planet's law? He asked, shaking his head. Don't you have protection? She gave a bitter smile. Law protects only the powerful, she said. And the ones chasing me have power. Thunder rolled far in the distance, shaking the thin windows of the small home. The children flinched and the younger one covered his ears. The widow gently held him closer, whispering something in her native tongue, soft and soothing. The human sighed and walked to the small kitchen corner. He poured water into a pot and set it to boil. His hands moved like habit. But his mind was racing. Why had he let them in? Why did her words stir something inside him? A mix of anger and something else he didn't want to name. She broke the silence again. Your home? It smells like metal and earth, she said softly. You work in the scrapyards? He nodded without looking. Ship repairs, old parts. Sometimes junk, he replied. Enough to keep the lights on. She looked around, her eyes scanning the walls and floor. It is more than we had, she whispered. More than many have. The water began to boil and he prepared a simple broth. He poured it into 3 small bowls and brought them over. Without a word, he handed one to each child, then one to the widow. She bowed her head deeply, then took the bowl with both hands. As the children ate slowly, trying not to make noise, he finally asked, What's your name? The widow paused. I am called Verena, she said, and my children are Lyra and Teco. He nodded. I'm Mason, he said simply. No title, no rank. Verena gave a soft smile. Titles do not feed children, she said. Kindness does. But even as she spoke those words, Mason noticed her eyes flick toward the window. She had been doing that all night. Subtle glances, tiny moments of worry. She was scared, not just of rejection, but of being found. Outside, the wind howled, and then a knock. Everyone froze. Verena's arms instinctively pulled her children in, her body shielding them. Mason reached for the old plasma wrench near the door. Another knock, louder this time, slow and heavy. Stay back, Mason whispered. He approached the door and opened it just a crack. A tall alien male stood outside, wearing a long gray coat with metal emblems on the chest. His eyes were sharp, cold. Rain slid down his face, but he didn't blink. I was told a fugitive female was seen near here, the alien said, his voice flat. A widow, with 2 children seen begging near the colony gates. Mason kept his voice calm. Haven't seen anyone, he said. Just a quiet night here. The alien's eyes narrowed. Strange, your lights were off before, he said. Now they're on. Generator's been acting up, Mason replied. Sometimes it flickers. There was a long pause. Rain tapped against the doorway. The alien leaned forward just slightly. If you are hiding her, he said slowly, you're violating intersettlement codes. Mason's face didn't move. And if you accuse me without proof, he said coldly, you're violating mine. For a moment, it was a silent standoff. 2 species, 2 minds, 1 house between them. Then the alien turned, his boots squelching on wet soil. I'll be back, he said over his shoulder. With questions, he disappeared into the dark. Mason shut the door, bolting it tightly. He turned to see Verena's face, pale, her body shaking slightly. They know, she whispered. They're coming. Mason didn't speak for a long moment. Then he walked to a hidden panel near the floor and opened it. Inside was a small crawl space used to store tools. Now it would be their hiding place. Get in, he said. Take the kids. Verena hesitated, her eyes wide. Why are you doing this? She asked. You don't even know me. Mason met her eyes. No one helped my sister when she needed it, he said quietly. I'm not repeating that mistake. Verena's lips trembled. She climbed inside the crawl space with her children, her eyes never leaving his face. He sealed the panel and sat back against the wall. Outside, thunder rumbled again, but inside the small house, a silent promise had been made. This was no longer just a shelter. It was the first stand against the danger yet to come. The night stretched on, heavy and silent. Rain tapped gently on the roof, a steady rhythm like a forgotten lullaby. Inside the small house, the human sat by the door, his plasma wrench resting across his lap. He hadn't moved in hours, eyes fixed on the shadows dancing outside the window. Behind the hidden panel, Verena sat in the tight crawl space, holding her children close. Her body ached, but she dared not shift. She could hear every sound, his footsteps above, the creak of the wooden floor, even the soft hum of the power lines outside. Her daughter, Lyra, had fallen asleep against her chest. Teiko, the younger one, clung to her side with small, trembling hands. Verena kissed their foreheads, whispering promises she wasn't sure she could keep. When morning came, there was no sunlight, only a dull gray light that leaked through the slats. Mason unlocked the panel and helped them out, offering water and a thin piece of bread. No words were spoken for a long time, finally. Verena sat down near the old heater, her children still half asleep beside her. Mason pulled up a chair facing her. His face was calm but firm. "It's time you told me everything," he said. Verena nodded slowly. Her eyes looked older than her face, heavy with memories she had carried alone for too long. "I was once a wife to a scientist," she began, her voice soft. "He worked for the Dominion's energy labs. Brilliant but quiet, always thinking, always building." She smiled faintly, remembering we didn't have much, but he loved me. And he adored the children. Mason stayed quiet, listening. The warmth from the heater glowed against the side of his face. But his eyes stayed cold, waiting for truth. One day, he discovered something, Verena continued, a way to convert star radiation into stable energy without fusion. He said it could free thousands of colonies from fuel taxes, maybe end the control of the trade lords. Her fingers gripped her knees as she spoke. But instead of praise, he was warned, she whispered. They told him to stop, to destroy his work. But he wouldn't. Mason leaned forward. What happened to him? Verena's lips trembled. They made it look like an accident, she said, voice cracking. His lab exploded and they told me he died trying to build something illegal. But I found the data crystal hidden inside our child's toy. She pulled a small, round object from the folds of her dress, a cracked, faded toy sphere with blinking lights inside wrapped in wires. Was a glowing blue crystal no bigger than a fingernail. This holds his last work, she said. His dream, his rebellion. Mason stared at it, then at her. That's why they're chasing you, he said slowly. They don't want you to survive, they want this destroyed. Verena nodded. I ran for a long time, she said. From planet to planet, hiding, selling scraps, begging. But wherever I went, someone followed. She looked at her children, her voice dropping to a whisper. I couldn't let them grow up as prisoners, or be used as bait. I chose to run, even if it meant dying in the dust. There was a long pause. Mason's hand clenched slowly around the handle of the wrench. He wasn't a hero, not a soldier, not a savior. He was just a mechanic with a broken home and a quiet life. But the woman in front of him had faced nightmares without flinching. And her children looked at him now, not with fear, but hope. You shouldn't have told me this, Mason finally said, voice low. Now they'll come for me too, Verena nodded, not blinking. I know, she said. That's why I'll leave. Before nightfall, but Mason didn't move. He looked at the children again, then back at her. They already knocked once, he muttered. They'll be back with more than questions this time. The silence between them grew heavier. Verena stood up, pulling the toy close to her chest. I'm sorry, she whispered. I thought maybe you were different. She turned toward the door, but Mason's voice stopped her. You're not going anywhere, he said. Verena froze. She turned slowly, confusion and disbelief on her face. Mason stood, his expression firm. If what you said is true, and I believe it is, then that thing you're carrying could save 100 worlds. I'm not letting them bury it. Or you. Tears welled in Verena's eyes. No one has ever said that to me, she whispered. He looked her in the eyes. Then it's about time someone did. Outside, the wind picked up, dust swirling across the hills beyond the settlement. Trouble was coming. Mason could feel it in his bones. But so was something else, something rare. For the first time in years, he felt like his life had meaning. And it all began with a desperate widow's plea. The sun never really rose in this part of the colony. It only cast a pale orange haze through the clouds of dust and smoke. Mason stood near the back window, staring at the hills beyond the scrapyard. They were too quiet. No wind, no birds. Not even the soft hum of passing hovercrafts. Something was wrong. Inside, Verena packed quickly. Her hands moving without pause, she tied a bundle of food Mason had given her, then gently helped her children dress in spare clothes. They didn't speak much. Lyra and Teiko already knew what silence meant. They had lived with danger like a shadow, always close, always quiet. Mason turned suddenly and pulled open the floor panel again. "We can't run," he said. "They'll be watching the roads." Verena froze. Her lips parted, but no words came. She looked toward the door, then the small window. "How many?" She finally whispered. Mason walked to the front door and opened it just a crack. He didn't need to count. Outside, 4 armored figures were moving through the narrow streets. One of them stopped in front of his neighbor's door, scanned it, then moved on. They wore the black and silver armor of the Enforcer Guild. Not local law, not government, private mercenaries. The kind you hire when you want no records, only results. "They're here for you," Mason said calmly. "But they don't know you're inside yet." Verena swallowed hard. Her hands gripped the toy containing the data crystal tighter than before. She stepped forward and stood in front of Mason. Her voice low but steady. "Give me to them," she said. "Say I tried to steal from you. You'll be safe." Mason didn't even blink. "You insult me," he muttered. "You think I'd let people like that take a mother and her kids?" Verena stared at him, her mouth trembling. "No one has ever protected me," she said. "Not once." Mason turned and grabbed a long canvas roll from under his workbench. Inside were tools, some sharp, some heavy, some modified for more than just repairs. He handed Verena a small pulse cutter. "If they break in," he said, "aim low and run for the hatch in the back wall." Lyra clung to her mother, her voice no louder than a breath. "Will they hurt you, Mr. Mason?" He looked at her and smiled gently. "Not if I hurt them first." A heavy knock shook the door. Then a voice, calm, mechanical, filtered through a speaker. "By authority of Sector 19 Enforcement. Open this door." Mason looked at Verena and whispered, "Get to the crawl space now." She hesitated, then obeyed. Pulling her children with her, she paused at the panel, turning back to look at him one last time. "Don't die," she whispered. Mason smirked. "Not planning to." The second knock wasn't a knock, it was a blast. The door shook, bolts rattled, and part of the top hinge snapped. Mason slid behind his workbench, flicking the panel that activated his shield field. A low hum filled the room as a weak blue shimmer spread over the doorway. Not strong enough to stop bullets, but enough to slow them. A moment later, the door exploded inward. Smoke poured into the room, and 3 armored figures stepped through. Weapons drawn, Mason didn't wait. He hurled a sonic charge under the bench, and it exploded in a burst of sound and blinding light. The first enforcer screamed and dropped. The second fired blindly. Plasma bolt striking the wall beside Mason's head, Mason rolled across the floor, slammed his wrench into the shooter's knee joint and knocked him down. He ducked behind a metal cabinet as a third figure opened fire. His ears rang, his arms shook, but he kept moving. He wasn't a soldier, but years of surviving in scrapyards had taught him how to fight dirty. The third enforcer turned his rifle toward the crawl space. He had seen movement, but before he could fire, Mason leapt from the side and slammed a charged spanner into his helmet. The spark sent the enforcer flying backward into the wall, unconscious. Silence followed. Only smoke and the smell of burning wire filled the room. Mason staggered, panting, sweat dripping down his neck. 3 were down, but 1 was missing. Then he heard it, the back hatch opening. He ran to the wall and pressed the emergency lock. But it was too late. He heard a scream, Lyra's voice. Sharp and afraid, Mason's heart stopped. He ran to the back room, past the broken crates. There at the open hatch was the 4th enforcer, holding Teko under one arm. His gun pointed at Verena. "Give me the crystal," the enforcer ordered. "Or the boy dies." Verena froze, her hands shaking. She looked at her son, then at Mason. Mason stepped forward, his voice low. "You don't want to do this." "I was paid to clean up a mess," the enforcer hissed. "And I don't leave messes behind." But before he could react, Verena threw the toy high into the air. As the enforcer's eyes followed it, Mason lunged forward, grabbing the barrel of the rifle and twisting it aside. The shot fired, but it hit the wall, not the boy. Verena caught Teko and pulled him away. Mason drove his knee into the enforcer's chest and slammed him to the ground. The fight was short and final. Verena held her children tightly, her breath coming in gasps. Mason picked up the cracked toy and handed it back to her. "This chase," he said, "is only the beginning." Verena nodded slowly. "But now we run together," she whispered. "Now we survive." Together. The smoke was still clearing when the colony sirens began to scream, low and distant at first, then louder, sweeping across the outer district like a wave. Red lights blinked across rooftops, signaling lockdown. Someone had reported the attack. Reinforcements were on the way. Inside the battered workshop, Mason stood at the broken hatch. Gripping the edge of the metal frame, his arms ached, his head throbbed, and his shirt was torn at the shoulder. But he didn't care about the pain. His eyes were on Verena, her arms wrapped tightly around her children, her face pale but determined. "We can't stay here," Mason said, his voice rough. "They'll send more, and this time it won't be 4. Verena nodded, clutching the cracked toy against her chest. "They'll bring soldiers, maybe even drones," she whispered. "They won't stop now." Mason moved quickly, pulling open the trap door in the corner of the room. A ladder dropped into darkness, an old maintenance tunnel that ran under the colony. "I used to hide spare parts down there," he said. "It's not pretty, but it'll get us past the outer scanners." Teko looked down nervously, his small hands holding onto his mother's arm. "Is it scary?" he asked, voice trembling. Mason knelt beside him and smiled. "It's dark, kid," he said, "but you'll be with me. And I don't scare easy." They climbed down one by one. The tunnel was damp and smelled like rust and old fuel. Mason led the way, holding a dim flashlight that flickered every few minutes. But even in the darkness, Verena walked with quiet strength, carrying her daughter and guiding her son. As they moved through the narrow corridor, Verena finally broke the silence. "Why are you doing this?" she asked softly. "You could have walked away. Most would." Mason didn't answer right away. He kept walking, his boots echoing in the wet metal tunnel. Then he stopped and turned around, his eyes meeting hers. "You know what I see when I look at you?" he said. "I see someone who lost everything, but still fights. You're not weak, Verena. You're stronger than anyone I've met." Verena looked at him, surprised. "No one ever called me strong," she whispered. "Then they were blind," Mason said, turning back. "You're a mother, carrying your whole world on your back. That's more strength than a soldier in armor." Before she could respond, Mason stopped again, this time because of a sound. A deep mechanical hum echoed ahead, unmistakable. "Search drones," he said. "They've reached the tunnels." He turned quickly and motioned them toward a side panel. Using a hidden switch, he opened a crawl space hidden behind old wiring. "Inside now," he ordered. "No noise, no light." They crawled in just in time. Moments later, the drone floated past, its red sensor sweeping the corridor like a snake's tongue. It paused, hovered for a few seconds, then moved on, its lights fading into the distance. Inside the crawl space, the children didn't cry, they didn't speak. They just clung to their mother, and to the quiet warmth of Mason's presence beside them. When the way was clear, they moved again, finally reaching the end of the tunnel. A rusted hatch led out into the far hills beyond the colony, an area few ever visited. Mason forced it open with a groan of metal, and cold wind rushed inside. They stepped out onto open ground. For a moment they stood in silence, breathing the fresh air. Then Mason turned and looked toward the distant colony lights, still blinking under the early night sky. "They'll follow us," Verena said quietly. "You know that, right?" "I'm counting on it," Mason replied. "I want them to come. I'm tired of hiding." Verena blinked in confusion. "What are you saying?" Mason reached into his jacket and pulled out a small transmitter, one he had built himself. "It's time we stop running," he said. "Time the galaxy hears the truth." He looked at the data crystal in her hand. "You said this could change everything," he said. "Then let's make sure it does." Verena stared at him. "Unsure, this could get us killed," she whispered. Mason smiled faintly. "Or it could finally give your children a future." Just then, a voice echoed behind them. "Step away from the woman and hand over the crystal." They turned slowly. 3 armored figures stood at the edge of the hill, weapons drawn. One of them was the same enforcer Mason had knocked out days ago, now wearing fresh armor and a cruel grin. "You should have stayed out of this, human," the man said. "Now you'll die for a woman who's not even your kind." Mason stepped forward, shielding Verena and the children behind him. "I don't care what kind she is," he said boldly. "She's more human than you'll ever be." He raised his wrench, glowing with charge, and as the enemy stepped forward, so did Mason, with defiance in every breath. The wind blew hard across the empty hills. Dust swirled around their feet as the 3 enforcers stepped closer, rifles pointed straight at Mason's chest. Behind him, Verena clutched her children tightly, pressing their heads into her side. Her heart raced, but her feet stood firm. Mason didn't move. His wrench crackled with blue energy in his hand. His jaw was tight, his eyes calm. "I won't let you take them," he said. The lead enforcer laughed. "You think that tool makes you brave?" he said. "You're nothing but a junker with a death wish." Mason's grip tightened. "You're wrong," he said. "I'm a man who has nothing left to lose." The second enforcer moved to flank him. Mason saw it out of the corner of his eye, but before he could react, a voice rang out behind them, clear and fierce. "Leave him," everyone froze. The voice didn't sound human, but it didn't sound weak either. It was Verena. She stepped forward, placing herself between Mason and the rifles, her eyes burning with fire. "I won't let you harm him," she said, her voice steady. "He is the first being who has shown me kindness, and that makes him mine to protect." The enforcers hesitated. Surprised by her boldness, the leader's expression shifted from amusement to caution. "You dare stand in our way, widow?" he sneered. "You think your words matter to us?" Verena raised her arm and held up the broken toy, the data crystal glowing faintly inside. "You want this?" she said. "Then come and take it." The enforcers lifted their weapons, ready to fire, but Mason acted first. With a loud roar, he charged forward, swinging the charged wrench at the first enforcer. The weapon slammed into his chest plate. Sparking violently, the enforcer flew backward, his armor smoking. The other two opened fire, plasma bolts lighting up the sky. Verena shielded the children behind a large rock. Her arms wrapped around them, Mason dodged left, rolling in the dirt, hurling a flash charge at their feet. A blinding burst filled the air. The second enforcer stumbled, and Mason tackled him to the ground, fists flying. He grabbed the rifle and smashed it against the rocks, shattering the barrel. The third enforcer took aim, but before he could fire, a soft pulse lit up behind him. Verena had taken the small cutter Mason gave her earlier. She jabbed it into the back of the enforcer's leg joint. Sparks flew and he collapsed with a scream. The fight ended in dust, heat, and heavy breathing. Mason stood over the fallen enforcers, bruised, bleeding, but still alive. Verena knelt beside him, helping him stand. "You fight like someone who's lost too much," she whispered. Mason smiled weakly. "And you protect like someone who finally found something worth keeping." He turned to the children, who peeked out from behind the rocks. "It's safe now," he called gently. "Come on out." Lyra and Teko ran to their mother. Burying their faces in her arms, Verena kissed their foreheads, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I'm here," she whispered. "Mama's here." Mason looked at the wrecked weapons, the broken helmets, the useless armor. "We can't stop them all," he said. "More will come." Verena held up the crystal again, its glow brighter now. "My husband once told me this could wake up a sleeping galaxy," she said. "I didn't understand what he meant. Until now." She turned to Mason, her eyes filled with certainty. "This isn't just about running anymore," she said. "This is about rising." Mason nodded slowly. "We need to transmit the data open source wideband," he said. "If everyone sees what's in that crystal, they'll know the truth. But we'll be hunted forever," she replied. "We already are," Mason said with a tired smile. "Let's make it worth it." As they prepared to move again, Teko tugged at Mason's shirt. "Mr. Mason," he said softly, "are we your family now?" Mason knelt and looked the boy in the eye. "You always were," he said. The sun finally broke through the clouds, casting golden light on the battered group. It wasn't victory, but it was something just as rare. It was unity. And it came from something deeper than blood or species. It came from defiance, from truth, from the decision to stand when others kneel. As they disappeared into the hills carrying a glowing secret and a promise, the enforcers behind them lay silent, and the winds of change began to move. They traveled under moonlight. No more running in panic. Now every step had a purpose. The hills behind them faded, and ahead stood the edge of a forgotten outpost, old, silent, and buried in dust. "The comms tower looked like a skeleton of metal bones. This place still works?" Verena asked quietly. Holding her children's hands, Mason nodded, his eyes scanning the half-collapsed station. "If I can get the power cell to recharge," he said, "we can transmit the crystal's data to every open relay on this side of the sector." Verena looked up at the tower, the sky glowing with stars behind it. "It will make us targets," she whispered. "All of us." Mason turned to her, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "We were already targets," he said. "Now we become witnesses." They stepped inside the structure, the children trailing behind them. Teko looked around at the broken panels and scattered wires, his voice small. Is this a safe place, Mama? Verena knelt beside him, brushing his hair back. Safety isn't a place, my love, she said softly. It's the people who choose to protect you. While the children settled in a corner with a blanket, Mason got to work. His fingers moved fast, fixing what others had left behind. The old tech coughed and hissed as he rebooted the interface. Sparks flying near his arm. He didn't stop, not even when blood dripped from a scrape on his cheek. Finally, the tower's main console blinked to life. Verena stepped beside him, holding out the cracked toy. Mason opened it carefully and pulled out the glowing data crystal. Are you ready? He asked. She nodded once. Yes, she said. Let the galaxy see what they tried to bury. He slid the crystal into the slot, and the console lit up with blue light. Files opened, one after another: schematics, audio logs, hidden research logs signed by Verena's late husband. A voice recording played faintly. This discovery can break the monopoly, the voice said. It must be shared, or we stay in chains forever. Mason tapped into the old comm relay and boosted the signal. With a final press, the transmission went live. Every open channel, every public feed, every outsider's frequency flooded with truth somewhere across the stars. A merchant paused mid-sail, hearing the broadcast. A mechanic looked up from his engine, recognizing the name of a murdered scientist, and a governor's assistant stared wide-eyed at the data flashing across her tablet. The crystal had done its job, but the cost was about to come. Outside, dust kicked up once again. Lights in the sky, too controlled, too fast. Dropships were incoming. Their shadows cutting across the land. Mason moved quickly, sealing the crystal's empty shell and grabbing the children. They're coming, he said. Too late to stop the message, but they'll try to silence the ones who sent it. Verena grabbed Lyra's hand, heart racing. Where do we go now? Before Mason could answer, a voice crackled through the console speaker. A female voice, calm and strong. Unknown outpost. This is Captain Aurelia of the Human Free Alliance, she said. Transmission received. We are inbound to extract you. Mason blinked in disbelief. The Resistance got the signal? He whispered. Verena's hand found his, and for the first time in days there was hope in her eyes. You said we were witnesses, she whispered. Now we're not alone. Moments later, another ship appeared from the clouds, sleek, silver, bearing a flag they didn't recognize. It landed with precision near the outpost, and soldiers stepped out. Not enforcers, not mercenaries. These wore white and gold, and on their shoulders was the symbol of open hands. Captain Aurelia herself stepped forward, tall, human, and commanding. You're the ones who sent the Dominion's dirty secrets to every planet in range, she said. Mason gave a small nod. And this, he said, placing his hand on Verena's back, is the family they tried to erase? Aurelia looked at the widow and her children. We've been looking for people like you, she said. People brave enough to speak, to stand, to fight. She held out her hand to Verena. Come with us, she said. There's a place for you and others like you, who've lost everything but their voice. Verena looked at Mason, her lips trembling. And what about him? Aurelia smiled. Any man who stands in front of rifles for children he didn't birth deserves a place in the new world we're building. The children ran forward first. Lyra and Tekko climbed into the ship. Looking back only once to wave, Verena followed, her fingers slipping into Mason's as they stepped aboard together. As the door closed behind them, Mason exhaled deeply. Guess we're not running anymore, he muttered. Verena leaned on his shoulder, her voice soft and full of peace. No, she whispered. We're going home. And above the stars, where once there was silence now, a family was reborn and the galaxy was watching.